I'm gonna go ahead and pause.
Good morning, South Carolina teachers and classrooms. I'm so excited to be here with you. My name is Erin Twamley, and I am a STEM children's book author. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my love of writing and STEM, because my guess is some of you are like, I didn't know that being a writer could be a STEM career. So I'm here to share a little bit with you all about how writing and using your skills of communication are actually a great career option for some of you. So let's get started. So this is actually me in the 4th grade, and some of you might be 4th grade teachers or be 4th graders yourself. And you can actually see that I started writing at a really young age. And I'm curious, how many of you have written something before? I might not be able to see all of you, but if you raise your hands in your classroom, I know that many of your teachers have had you writing. You've probably poems. And how many of you like to draw? I see a few hands going up. I think we probably have some illustrators as well in this room. That is fantastic. No matter what age or grade you're in, you can start writing and drawing at any point in time. Now, in the 4th grade, I was asked to write my first nonfiction story. Now, if anybody could tell me what nonfiction is, maybe what I'll do is have your teachers type it into the chat. What is nonfiction? I know some of you might be just learning the difference between fiction and nonfiction, and others of you might actually know. Oh, good. I see some awesome answers here. Perfect. So nonfiction means it's real. It's true. Exactly. Nonfiction is when we actually use real life events and we want to tell or share a story. So my first story that I wrote that was nonfiction was about a little squirrel. It was a red squirrel that had fallen out of its nest in my friend Stephanie's backyard. And her and I decided that we should try and rescue it and make sure that it got the milk it's needed. And that's the story that I wrote about the very first time. And since that time, I started to do more writing. I wrote journals, I wrote letters, I did a lot of poetry. So you can start writing at any point in time. It's never too early to become a writer or to share your love of writing. So all that to say, I actually started to take my love of writing and create books. So I'm a children's book author, meaning I write books for kids just like you. And my favorite part is that I get to pick what topics I want to write about. And as you'll see here, all of the topics in the books that I write about encompass STEM, which we're celebrating this month. And STEM stands for, you can just yell it and say it out loud. I'm sure your teachers will love that. What does it stand for? It stands for science, technology, engineering, or math. So I get to take my love of all of those topics and write stories and share information for you in children's books. My very first book I wrote is the one on the left that's bright yellow. It's called Climate Change, Discover How It Impacts Spaceship Earth. And what's really fun about my book writing journey is that I've had the opportunity to also write with somebody else. So for some of these books, I have a co-author, which means I get to share their ideas, to brainstorm together and write many of these books here. My latest book that's just going to come out this summer, so this July of 2022, is the book on the right, and that's called Everyday Superheroes Women in Energy Careers. So I don't know about you, but I believe that there are superheroes all around us. And these superheroes are the people who are solving problems, who are inventing new things, who are imagining new ways to use different tools or equipment. And these superheroes are really changing how we live on our earth. So that is one of my latest books. And if you're looking for something kind of silly, I also have a perfect book for you. This book is called Capturing Cow Farts and Burps. Yes, I got to write a whole book about farts. It might sound really silly, but we're actually trying to figure out how to capture all that methane from cow burps and turn it into electricity. So this just gives you an idea of some of the children's books that I've been writing. And I've been writing since the year of 2015. So about the past 7 years, I've been actually publishing and writing books with different publishers. Now I'm curious if any of you know who else helps me write a book or who helps create a book. Because creating a book is not something that you do on your own. There are lots of important people that take part in this creation process. So maybe you want to brainstorm with one of your students next to you who's sitting by you. Who else might be involved in creating a book? And I'll give you a minute. Involved. All right, now some of you might have guessed that there's an illustrator involved. All of you drawers might have suggested that. There's the author, yes, 100%. That's me or someone like me, the person who writes the words. And there's an editor. How many of you sometimes need help with your spelling or your grammar? Raise your hand. And I'm hoping some of your teachers raise their hands too, because sometimes even we adults need help with our grammar and our spelling. And editors are the people that actually help us do that and get to read our work. Now, some of you might not be as familiar with these other designer. Now, designers have a really neat job because they actually take all the pictures from the illustrator, they take all the words from the author, and they put it all together into a book format. So their job is to make the design of the layout on the page. They make sure what should go where, what direction, what color. And designers are really critical because they make it into a book. Now, some of you might be familiar with this term, publisher. So I've worked with many different publishers. In fact, I've got 3 different publishers I've worked with. Some of you might know some of their names like Random House or Penguin or Cardinal Press. Now, these are big companies basically that produce lots and lots of books. And so the publishers are the ones who decide what stories are to be out. Now, I'm curious if anybody actually said the most important person who's on the book team, who is a reader. Yes, that's you. You are the most important person. If there's no one to read my books or open them up and look at them, then my book just sits on a shelf. So readers are really important to the book writing process. In fact, I often work with classrooms before my book gets published so that kids just like you and teachers can give me feedback on the books that I'm writing. So keeping readers in mind is so important, and also making sure that we get your feedback as readers is really important as an author. Now, many of you might be reading books in different formats. Then you might have a Kindle, you might have an e-reader, you might have a tablet, even at school, that you're able to read books electronically. We call those ebooks. You also might have listened to books before. I know when I go on long car trips with my 2 little kids, we like to do audiobooks. And audiobooks are just when someone else reads the book to you. So I create all these different options. Now, this is kind of the fun interactive portion. So if what you'll do is if you've got a scrap of paper or something to write with, a pencil, a little corner of a paper, do not write on your desk, please. I want you to write down, how long do you think it takes me to write a book? You saw some of my covers. You saw that I write on this topic of STEM, science and technology and engineering and math. How long do you think it takes me to write a children's book? If you think 1 month, you can write down that. 6 months, 1 year, or even more than a year. So go ahead and write that down. And if you guessed 1 year, you are about right. On average, it takes me 1 year to write a book. The longest book was my first STEM superheroes book. That book actually took me 2 years, but typically I produce 1 book every year. And that's in part because that great big book creation team, the illustrator, the editor, the designer, the publisher, the readers, I've got to work with all those people to make sure that the book can come to life. So creating a book is not just about the writing, but there's lots of components and people I need to work with to make that book come to life. And I am currently writing a book, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what I'm writing about. I am writing a new book about a woman named Eugenie Clark, and Foot actually has E on the end of it. And she might be someone fun for you to do some research on in your classroom. Now, Eugenie Clark lived in the 1800s. And she was a woman who was doing STEM experiments in her backyard. In fact, what she was doing was taking jars and putting them outside and measuring the temperature and what different gases were in those jars. In fact, Eunice Foote was one of the first climate scientists. And she was trying to study what gases, sometimes called greenhouse gases, do to the temperature on Earth. So I want to write a picture book on Eunice Foote, but one of my challenges is, and you might find this in research with your teacher or on your own, is that there are no known pictures of Eunice Foote. So I don't know what she looks like. I found pictures of her daughter. I found pictures of her husband, but I have yet to find a picture of her. So I'm trying to brainstorm and work with my publisher to figure out how we can write a picture book about a woman that we don't know what she looked like. So look for this book in the future. Do a little bit of research on this climate scientist, Eunice Foote. She's a woman you should know, as she was studying greenhouse gases and their impact on our temperatures. Now, I've already shared with you that I write about science and technology and engineering and math. Now, I want to do a little exercise with you so that you can understand why I actually write on this topic. So I like to do this exercise with my students or classrooms that I get to visit, because I think it's going to give you some insight into why I write about this topic. So if you're in a classroom or you're a teacher even, please close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a scientist. Keep your eyes closed, and I want you to make sure that you're going to draw a complete picture of what that scientist looks like in your head. I want you to imagine what they look like. I want you to imagine what they're wearing. I want you to imagine what tools or equipment they might have on them, around them, near them. I want you to imagine a setting, the place. What type of environment are they in? Are they inside? Are they outside? And I want you to have a good, complete picture of what that scientist looks like. And then I want you to open your eyes. Now, if you'll do me a favor, and I'm going to give a description of a scientist, and if that's some characteristic of your scientist, I'd love for you to raise your hand. If your scientist was wearing a white lab coat, raise your hand. All right. If your scientist was in a laboratory, raise your hand. And a laboratory might be something like they had big long tables, they might have had some chemistry beakers, some different acids or bases. All right, if they were in a laboratory, was your scientist anybody had a man that they pictured? Did anybody have a scientist that was outside? Great. Now, what happens with this experiment is that many kids, and even some of you, imagine a scientist who's in a white lab coat, who's a man, who's working in a laboratory. But boys and girls, many scientists don't wear a white lab coat. They don't work in a laboratory, and scientists can be women. So I write about this topic because I want to share about the awesome scientists, engineers, technologists, and even mathematicians who don't wear a white lab coat and who look like you. So I'm going to share a few of those with you today. Anybody know what kind of scientist this is? Her name is Dr. Lisa White, and she actually works at the Berkeley Museum in California. So you could talk to your neighbor or you could raise your hand. What type of scientist is this? And if you guessed this is a paleontologist, you are right. Paleontologists are scientists that study fossils. In fact, Dr. Lisa White studies microfossils, so really small fossils. And she studies these fossils at a museum. And she spends most of her day teaching kids or people who visit the museum all about the fossils that are inside the museum. So what I love about her is that she gets to be a scientist that gets to interact with the public and see what new fossils are coming into a museum. This is a real scientist and a real woman who's in one of my books, STEM Careers. Now, this is a pretty fun scientist as well. She's a marine biologist. Who can tell me what a marine biologist does or what might they study? Awesome. So marine biologists, they study the plants or the animals that live in the ocean. So the trick with remembering these scientists is they study what's in the ocean. The oceanographer studies the actual ocean. So you can remember that because oceanographer has the word ocean in it. So they're actually studying like the concentration of salt, the temperature of the ocean, but marine biologists study the things in the ocean. Now, again, this is a real scientist. Her name is Dr. Eugenie Clark. In fact, she's actually already passed away, and she did not get eaten by a shark. But she spent her entire life swimming with different sharks. In fact, she was one of the first scientists to use scuba diving equipment to go swimming with sharks and do science. And she had an important question that she wanted to ask. she had this curiosity. Do sharks move when they sleep? So you can say yes or no first. What's your guess? Yes or no? And then I want you to think about, why is this a scientific question? Why is this something that she would want to study? Because Miss Erin, it kind of seems like it's a little bit silly. But if you talk to your neighbor or your friend or someone around you that's close, you might come up with an answer. I'll give you a few moments. Now, studying sharks when they sleep was an important endeavor for Dr. Eugenie Clark because of the way sharks breathe. As you can see on this illustration here, sharks either have somewhere between 3 or 7 gills, and those gills push water in and out, and that's how they breathe their oxygen, their air. So the hypothesis was sharks have to move when they sleep, otherwise they would stop breathing. So Dr. Eugenie Clark has swam with sharks over 700 times, and not only did she watch sharks with her very own eyes, but she took some of the first video and pictures of sharks when they were sleeping all around the world. And what her discovery was is that sharks do not have to move when they sleep. And boys and girls, we did not know that until this scientist started to actually swim with sharks. And she spent most of her lifetime in different parts of the world swimming with sharks as a scientist. She wasn't in a laboratory, and most of the time she's wearing scuba diving gear instead of a white lab coat. Now, what she did discover is that sharks are smart animals. And if you've ever felt that push or that pull when you're in the ocean or in a lake or in a river, you can kind of feel that water movement. Sharks actually put themselves into that water movement, and that water movement moves them so they can still breathe when they're sleeping, but they're actually not expending any energy. So pretty interesting. So if you want to do some more research on sharks, and there's some more research that's come out on different types of sharks, do different things when they sleep, and they sleep differently. In fact, you can even read about whales and how some whales sleep vertically like this. So if you're interested in marine biology, this could be a science career for you. Now, I also like to study and share about one of my favorite STEM careers, which is a zoologist. And zoologists are women like Sissy Koo. She works at the Calgary Zoo. In fact, she spends most of her day and time helping to raise baby pandas. Now, baby pandas are an interesting creature because when we see them, we often envision them as very large and kind of slow moving animals that are black and white, and they eat lots and lots of bamboo. But all of these pandas, when they're born, are actually really small and they need a lot of caretaking. So what I want you to do is hold up your hand, make kind of like an L shape, because the distance between the top of your index finger and your thumb, that is about how small a baby panda is when they are born. In fact, a baby panda looks something like this. Now, this picture is actually blown up so that you can see it, but they're actually really small. They're almost naked. They kind of look like a little rat or a mouse. You can see that its little ear is up there, its little top, its nose is actually down on this. This is a washcloth it's sitting on. And they are one of the tiniest little creatures when they are born. So the zoologist, Sissy Koo, that you just saw, gets to spend most of her days at a zoo, one, and with baby pandas, making sure that they can grow up into the big pandas that the zoo loves to share with its visitors. So I share these scientists with you because I want you to think about where scientists can work and what kind of things they can do on a daily basis. In fact, I also want to share this woman right here. Her name is Sonia Kerry. And what Disney princess do you think she animated? If you guessed Disney Princess Tiana, you are right. Sonia Kerry is actually a mom and an animator who's worked for lots of different companies, including Disney. She spends most of her days now teaching other people. In fact, she likes to teach lots of kids, just like you, how to animate. She's got a love of drawing and a love of science that she gets to combine to make some of your favorite characters, like the Disney Princess Tiana. She also worked on other movies like Winnie the Pooh, and she's worked on some Netflix TV shows that you might have seen before. As an animator, she gets to work in an office or sometimes at home to create all these different characters that can come to life. I like to share all of these different women with you, and I call them STEM superheroes in my book because I want you to think about different types of people, different types of jobs, and have an expanded view of where science and technology, engineering, and math happens. Because it doesn't just happen at a laboratory, it doesn't just happen in a white lab coat. And there are lots of different jobs in STEM that are shaping our world and helping us to solve lots of problems. That's why I like to focus on sharing these stories and careers of different women in science, technology, engineering, and math in my books. I also like to write about silly and curious science. So if some of you like some silly things, I actually got this idea to write this book about capturing cow farts and burps from a fourth grader who had read my first book about climate change and was really curious about where the methane from cows was coming from. And it got me doing more research on where and how methane is released, what kind of animals release methane, why cows release a lot of methane, and what we can do with all of that methane. So if your love of STEM comes from something silly, like you're fascinated by burps and farts, that's okay. In fact, it's great. And there's lots of things that you can do with all that information, like writing a book, telling a story, drawing a picture, and sharing that with other people. What I love about being a STEM author is that I get to combine my love of science, technology, engineering, and math with writing and research. So I get to share what I know and what I learned with kids just like you. If you want to find more about me or connect with me in your classroom, I'd love for you to do that. You can find me at erintwamley.com. And I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about what a STEM author does, why it's important for me to share my STEM story with kids like you, and that maybe you got a little bit of sense of wonder or curiosity or interest in being a STEM author. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, South Carolina, for inviting me to celebrate STEM Education Month with you.